Your conference will begin momentarily. Please continue to hold. Your conference will begin momentarily. Please continue to hold. Your conference will begin momentarily. Please continue to hold. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. If we have Superintendent Thurman on the line,
could you please press star then 0, and we can place you in with the other speakers. Again, Superintendent Thurman, please press star then 0. Thank you.
Your conference will begin momentarily. Please continue to hold. Your conference will begin momentarily. Please continue to hold. You are now being joined to your conference. For a menu of available commands, press *#. There are 101 participants on the call, including you.
Participants are in a listen-only mode. If you should need any assistance during the conference, just press star then 0. I would now like to turn the conference over to your host, Senator Steve Glazer. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, AT&T, for organizing the logistics of this call. Hello, everybody. This is Senator Steve Glazer. Welcome to our 20th coronavirus virtual town hall. We've done 19 of these. They're all on my website if you want to go back and listen on a topic area that you still have interest in. This is our effort to try to bring experts together to inform you of things that are happening both about the coronavirus as well as all the impacts it's having, certainly on schools, which is the topic of our conversation today. I know that this call finds many of you in very difficult circumstances. This pandemic is nothing that we've ever experienced in our lives, and I know that it comes with great hardship, great inconvenience, and it's understandable, and I appreciate everyone's earnest efforts to try to cope with it as best that we can. I am joined in this conversation by my colleagues in the legislature, Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer-Cahan and Tim Grayson. Hello to you both. Why don't you say hello so we know you're there?
Hello, Senator, and hello, everyone listening. This is Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, and thanks for joining us. I'm excited to join you, Senator, for this conversation. As you know, I am experiencing distance learning and the struggles with school firsthand as a local school parent. So it's an issue that is near and dear to my heart. So thanks for putting this together.
Indeed, and thank you for your partnership. Assemblymember Grayson, are you on the line as well?
Yes, I am. And Senator Glazer, thank you so much for putting this together, assembling us, and then connecting us ultimately with the Superintendent of Public Instruction. I think the health and safety of our teachers and our students is first and foremost. But at the same time, we must figure out a way to keep their education at the highest quality possible, even through distance learning or whatever the options are that are out there. So thank you for putting this together. I'm looking forward to a very informative session.
Well, we have a great lineup of experts, people smarter than me about what's happening with our schools. Certainly our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond. We will also have conversations with Janet Schultz, the superintendent of the Pittsburgh Unified School District, Superintendent Richard Whitmore, who's the head of the Lafayette Unified School District, Superintendent Bowers, head of the Livermore Unified School District, and Ann Katzberg, who is the president of the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Education Association. That's the teachers union. As everyone knows, school districts across California are making very tough decisions about whether students should come back into the classroom as the state continues to face the increasing infection levels from this coronavirus. And the central question is, can it be done safely? And how can it be done? This comes at a time in which the governor just this week is reclosing a lot of things that had been opened for the last few weeks and for the last month, including indoor dining, bars, houses of worship, hair salons, malls, and gyms in many parts of the state. As I'm sure everyone listening knows, cases, excuse me, cases and rates of hospitalizations have risen sharply. California now has over 330,000 COVID-19 cases and over 7,000 deaths from the virus. The number of new cases set a record just this week. We're averaging over 8,000 new cases a day. Now, the governor has asked each of the state's more than 1,000 school districts to determine for themselves whether to reopen their classrooms. School districts in my Senate district, there's 19 of them, are largely starting the school year by offering distance learning, although some school districts are exploring some hybrid options, and we're going to talk about those in a moment. My first guest is our wonderful State Superintendent, Tony Thurmond. Tony, are you on the line? See if we've got him connected here yet.
I think he's still in listen-only mode. Superintendent, I think if you press *0, that'll get you into speaking mode.
All right, well, hopefully they can figure that one out as I give a full introduction of the superintendent. He hails from a teaching background. His mother was a school teacher, and the superintendent himself taught at Richmond schools before entering politics, where he was elected to the state assembly, and of course as our state superintendent in 2018. I understand, superintendent, you have two daughters who are currently in public schools. And you also served on a school board, I believe, West Contra Costa Unified School Board. I know that you received your bachelor's at Temple University, and you earned your master's degree in law and social policy and social work at Bryn Mawr College. And hopefully, with that long introduction, Superintendent Thurman, have you been able to join our conversation? Okay, maybe that's him. Superintendent? Well, while we wait for him to join, and operator, if you can let us know when he has been able to join the call. Let me bring in Assemblywoman Rebecca Bauer-Cahan. You have a couple kids in school right now. How are you coping through all of this?
Well, I'm, as like many others, looking forward to seeing what we decide for the fall. I think all of us parents, like you mentioned, want the health and safety of our children and our families to be put first. That is critical, but also we get the essential business of teaching our kids and getting them the social emotional learning and experience they need in grade school, and so that's critical to all of this. So it's an important conversation that's happening. There's so many things to take into consideration, and I really want to give a shout out to all of our local school boards who are, I know, having sleepless nights and working so hard to make the right decisions in what are extremely challenging circumstances and times, and to our teachers and our educators who are their partners alongside them in trying to figure out how to best do this. I mean, nothing is ideal, but I'm hopeful that we'll figure out a way to get our kids learning and engaged and move forward in a safe way. Complicated.
And Assemblymember Grayson, how are you coping with all this, and how is your family?
Family is healthy and safe. I have a daughter that is entering into her second year in college and dealing with the kind of the same issue in the sense that there is that the need for distance learning, but then when there are classes such as labs or things like that, how do they facilitate that in a hybrid type sense where they do what they can distance wise, but then come in for the lab part of it and keep it safe? It's very, as my colleague said, it's very, very challenging with the school boards. What I'm really interested in is seeing how the local school boards and the state can coordinate and complement one another to make sure that our students stay first in the conversation when it comes to health and safety and education.
Well, these are challenging times. Assemblywoman, have you found any particular tricks of the trade in terms of guidance for other parents and how you keep your kids engaged and focused?
Yeah, we definitely are working hard at having them engage with their friends, right? Even if that's virtually via Zoom, making sure that they do have that connection because it's so critical to keeping them happy and mentally well. And, I think that's critical. I found one of the things I'm excited to talk to the superintendent and some of our local superintendents about is the place my kids were most engaged, and I think I've heard from fellow parents, and I'm sure many on the line agree, is when they were doing synchronous learning with their teachers, right? So on a Zoom call, engaging with their teacher, that was when my kids were most engaged. And I've got a kindergartner, a second grader, and a fourth grader. They all just finished those grades. And, even my fourth grader, who's much more self-sufficient, that was when he was most happy and learning. And I think that's a question of how do we get more of that? Because we had so little of it in the spring, and I think parents and educators want to see more of it, and it's a real challenge given the distance. But I think that's the most engaging piece.
Well, I want to see if Superintendent Thurman, I've got a text message saying he's trying to get in, and we want to see if he's in the call yet. Operator. Okay, sounds like he is not in yet. Well, let me do this. Let me invite Superintendent Janet Schultz from Pittsburgh. You've been a superintendent there since 2014. You have a wonderful background in education. Give us a quick view as we're waiting for Superintendent Thurman. What's the status at Pittsburgh?
Good morning. Yes, thank you. So in Pittsburgh, we are going to start in full distance learning. And when the health conditions improve, then we would want to transition to a hybrid. We've been planning all summer through a variety of advisory committees with representatives from teachers, classified, admin, counselors, mental health, planning all summer for both scenarios, knowing that we're going to need to be flexible. But we did have our board meeting last evening, and our board did unanimously support the recommendation to begin our school year in full distance learning.
And what was the hardest issue that you wrestled with as they tried to make this decision?
I think everyone agrees that the health and safety is, the most important thing to keep in mind. And then as soon as you make a decision, of course there's 100 questions of what will that look like. And so really firming up the educational experience, what the Assemblywoman said about having the daily interactions is very important. So those are, and how do we continue to provide supports for our students with disabilities as well, were some of the main issues that, we have been grappling with and planning for.
And was there a lot of engagement from your community in this decision?
We did. We've had a lot of community engagement. So throughout the summer with the various committees, we've also done some webinars early on, got some surveys, webinars for parents and families to update them on things change so quickly, get their feedback, present various scheduling options, have them weigh in. And so that's been very helpful in planning. And we've been planning for both all along. We were first focused more on the in-person hybrid, such a unique learning, challenge and scheduling that, but been planning for both all along. And, of course, now we will work on the details of starting in the full distance learning. But we've had some great community engagement through surveys, through polls, and then, of course, public comment at our board workshops and board meetings.
Well, we've gotten a lot of questions from parents and from teachers, and for those listening, if you'd like to ask some questions, please, you can still submit them, and we'll try to get them asked as we go here. But Trish asked the question about access to the Internet, computers, remote learning, that if that's the pathway that the school districts are going to go in, how can we ensure that all the kids are able to connect and have the means to connect? Did you guys talk about that, and what are you doing in Pittsburgh about that issue?
That is a huge issue for us, and we ordered significant numbers of Chromebooks. So we did sort of emergency orders when this first happened in order to get devices to our families. We've done more orders. I'm hopeful that we will get some assistance from the state as well too. But we purchased significant numbers of Chromebooks so that we can check those out. We did check them out, and then we're going to have to check out more as we stay in this distance learning so that every child has a device. In terms of Internet access, we are working with Internet providers to try and expand the access and get some hotspots to families who do not have Internet access.
And so you had some experience with this in the spring as the school year ended. Were you able to determine how many kids were not getting engaged, not getting their assignments, not being responsive? Do you have some sense of that?
We kept track of our students and who were engaged and with our teachers, and we had about 15%, I would say, who I would consider were not engaged, and so that was very concerning. We had multiple efforts in terms of reaching out to families and trying to do some home visits as well too, to make sure that we could connect, with all of our families, including our homeless and our foster youth families as well too. So we did do a lot of outreach efforts, and we will continue to do so. We had about 15% of our students who were not regularly engaged.
Assemblywoman, you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to add something that, the superintendent brought up, which is the districts need to start spending money, right, which we all know, listening to this call, as people engaged in education in our communities, is so tight in our school districts, on these devices and these hotspots and getting kids equipped in a way that they weren't anticipating. And so, she mentioned hoping that there will be movement from the state in support. And I wanted just to let everyone on the call know and the superintendent know that we are carrying a bill that would ensure that there's about $25 million coming from the PUC that will get to our school districts to help buy those exact things, the computers, the hotspots, the things that will get our students connected, because the legislature and the state know that without the devices to connect, distance learning can't happen for all of our students. And equity in learning across all students is so critical. So that digital divide has to be closed, and we have to be there to support you fiscally, because your budgets aren't able to absorb the immense cost that goes into buying that. So we are working on it, and hopefully that bill will pass out of the Senate and get you those dollars you need.
So we're
Thank you, Assembly Member.
Great.
This is Tony Thurman.
Superintendent Thurman.
Senator.
Thank you very much.
How
we were just speaking with Superintendent Janet Schultz from Pittsburgh, and Janet, we're going to come back to you in just a few minutes, but I want to welcome our State Superintendent, Tony Thurman. Thank you. Sorry about the technical problems of getting you in.
Not a problem, Senator. The subject was about devices, and I think the experiences that we have reflect what our students and families are dealing with in terms of connectivity. So I appreciate the circumstances, but I also appreciate you having all of us on today. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking the time. And look, we're going to talk about a serious subject, but I always like, people know us by names, and but not really with any depth. But I wanted to say, I know that you're struggling, as we all are, to cope with this, running the school system of the state, as well as taking care of your family. How is it going for you personally?
Senator, as you can imagine, as you heard from your colleagues in the legislature, everyone in California, in this nation, in this world is affected by it. And I really want to start by commending the resilience of our students and their families and our educators, and I mean that broadly, administrators, everyone. This is really, as you said earlier, Senator, I was listening. I heard everything, and I agree with you. This is probably the toughest experience that most of us will encounter in our lifetime. And it comes at a time when there are very few clear answers about how to really combat something for which there's not a whole lot of data. The science isn't completely settled, but there are some things that we do know that can keep us safe, and we're working on those things. It's been tough. The pandemic has been tough for all children, including my own. Lots of questions about the unknown, lots of fears about, getting sick, and of course, just not having contact with friends and peers and teachers. And so we share all those concerns. And what we try to do at the district, at the Department of Education, is work with all the great superintendents that you have on this call. I've just heard really great things about efforts to connect to students. Making sure, as Assembly Member Bauer Kahan said, having live contact between a teacher and a student is so important. If all we have right now is remote or distance learning, that is important. I hear from students and teachers who tell me that their students are already on the line before the class even starts, when we were in distance learning before the summer broke, meaning that's important. We need to have, as I say, we have to take care of the three pillars. First and foremost, keep everybody safe. Second, we've got to address the social-emotional learning needs of all of our students. And finally, we have to make sure that there is continuity of learning, good standards around distance learning, and training and professional development. Let's face it, we all went into distance learning overnight with no playbook on how to do that. Remote learning was not the way in California. It is now, for now, it's part of the way. And we have an opportunity to make sure that if we find ourselves in distance learning again, we make it stronger, and we make sure we address equity, and we address learning loss, and we offset those issues. And there's a whole bunch of things I'd love to tell you about, Senator, but I'm going to wait until you cue me on where you want me to go, and we're happy to share.
Well, there is a lot to talk about, and I know that under your leadership, you've been working really hard with your team to provide guidance to school districts that are wrestling with this decision. The big question is that, I think a lot of districts would love to get stronger guidance from the state to say you should open or you should not open, and the idea of putting this choice in their hands has created a lot of complexity and uncertainty and worry, and I'm sure you hear that too. And I know the governor's gotten that question quite a bit. Why aren't you telling all of us to only go remote learning or to do something different? Well, what would you say to that in terms of leadership from the top versus the input and the wisdom from the school districts themselves?
I'll speak for myself, Senator, and then I'll say what I think is happening as it relates to the governor and your inquiry. I can just say this, that ultimately safety is paramount. If schools had to open tomorrow, I don't think that most of our districts are in a place where things would be safe enough to do so. And I've said this publicly, and I've said that I respect districts like the ones on this call that have made the decision to move into distance learning. One of the key metrics for us is the percentage of cases of COVID infection in any particular community. And in many communities in our state, the infection rate is just so high that we should not risk the safety of our children, the safety of their educators, the safety of the students' families. And so for now, as we're seeing, many districts are planning to open in distance learning as a precaution. Doesn't mean that we may not find that the conditions are better later where we can move to in-person instruction. I think as Assembly Member Grayson said it, we have to balance safety, but anything that we can do to create the opportunity for students to be able to learn in person, anything we can do to support the families who have to go back to work, we have to look for it. But none of that can come at the safety and the well-being of our students and their educators. And so for now, we find ourselves in a position of largely needing to open in distance learning, with the exception of a few counties. There are a few counties that find themselves with very, very low rates of COVID infection, and they have space. They have something that many of the districts on this call don't have the luxury of having. I'm a neighbor, as you mentioned, not far. I'm in the Bay Area too, in the East Bay, and I know that our districts, for them to maintain physical distance for students is a huge challenge. While we work out those challenges, then we should take advantage of distance learning. And so, the California Department of Education is doing its best to provide clarity to districts when they ask for help. We've done things that have not been done before. Like we literally convened each and every one of the county health officers together with county superintendents and others to talk through how to approach these decisions. The way everything is set up in our state, it favors and points to local decision making. And I respect that, right? As you said, Senator, I'm a former school board member. I care deeply about local decision making, and the way things have been set up is that local boards and superintendents make decisions informed by local county health officers. I'll say this, but I'll say this. I acknowledge that we do need to provide more clarity from the state. There's no question of that. The state has responsibility to do things like provide more personal protective equipment. And I'm grateful that, through our work with the governor's office and the Office of Emergency Services, personal protective equipment has been provided for schools for at least the first 60 days. And I should say I'm grateful that the legislature, that all of you legislators have made that happen through the budget that you provided, especially in these tough times, that you provided the resources for these things, and that there's money in the budget for distance learning. All that said, the state needs to do more. And as we speak, I know for a fact that the California Department of Public Health, the experts on health matters, are working around the clock to put out some new guidance, and we need it. We all need it. And at the Department of Education, we're trying to supplement that. We put out guidance with examples of how schools might reopen that focus on the things that we know about, how to arrange class sizes and what educators might do. And by the way, it was informed by teacher groups and classified staff and administrators, all of us working together. But on the health questions, this calls for more information, and we're trying to cobble that together while we wait for the Department of Public Health to put out its latest guidance, which we are told is imminently to be released. My sense is that this governor is facing probably one of the toughest challenges anywhere, is to figure out how to balance local decision-making but also safety. I know people are asking for more, and I think it's a fair request. More is needed. And I promise you this, Senator, no matter what, at the California Department of Education, we will continue to consult with districts to provide information. By the way, we're organizing a meeting for all 1,000 of our school districts to be a part of a conversation with the California Department of Public Health so they can hear the latest guidance right away and they can ask questions because we know that they need it. I'll be able to give you that information to update the specific date and time soon, Senator. I just wanted you to know, and you know what, Senator, your district is hearing it first. And the legislators on this call, you're hearing it first that we've arranged for there to be a direct meeting for all 1,000 school districts with the Department of Public Health to be able to get more information and guidance on health matters.
Well, that's terrific. It's great to hear. And again, we appreciate your leadership on that. Gabriel writes in with a question that I think many people have, and it's about the announcements from the federal government about mandating openings of schools. Can you speak to that voice that we've heard from the East that have somehow said that we must open our schools? What do you have to say about that?
Is that for me, Senator?
No, that's a question from Gabriel. He wrote in.
Oh,
as you know, the president has indicated that he is insisting that schools open. Any thoughts on that pronouncement?
Yeah, listen, this isn't about politics, but I'm going to say this, that I just think that the manner in which the president is saying it is just really doesn't take into account the lack of safety that we're seeing all around us. And you know, I don't understand how the president can make a message that says, as we see all around us, everything is closing all around us, how he could ignore the warning signs that suggest our children, our babies, could be at risk, and their educators, and their families, quite frankly, because we know that children might inadvertently infect their parents. And so I think that, with all due respect to the president's comments, I think now is a time for caution. Now is a time for safety, not inflammatory remarks like when the president says that he might cut funding for school districts, because they don't open. I'm sorry, I just have to call it what it is. It's dangerous, it's reckless, and it's immoral to threaten to cut funding to schools that actually need more funding. The message that I've been sending to our federal leaders, including the president's office, is don't make threats when people are trying to be safe. Rather, this is a time when we need more funding. The state of California needs, like every other state, needs more funding. School is a key area. We need more money for computing devices. We know going into this pandemic, we had probably 1 million students who did not have access to the internet. We know that we have many families, many of them from various backgrounds, who don't have a computer at home at all, and all the family members trying to get information from school, from life, from work, off of one cell phone, if that. And so, sorry, Senator, I do have a few thoughts about the question from Gabriel, and I do have a few thoughts about the president's comments. My message back to the president is, we're all struggling. Let's struggle together, but we need leadership and we need resources that are going to get us through this. And, I appreciate you, Senator, and the assembly members on this call, how we're all working together. There are no easy answers here, but we're in this together, and we are stronger together, and we'll do more together on behalf of our 6 million students.
Very well said. Assemblywoman Bauer-Cahan, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a follow-up, and I want to thank you for your leadership, Superintendent, and all of the educators on this call, because you said that's what we need right now. But I have a question. You mentioned that one of the metrics that we should be looking at, and I think this is right, I know our counties are looking at it for opening and rollbacks, is the percent of spread that we're seeing in the community. And locally, we've eclipsed 8% at our testing sites, which was sort of the metric our local county health had been looking at when discussing a question of rollback. Do you have a percent, a number, a metric that, or does Department of Public Health, that we should be looking at to make these decisions about distance learning or going back to the classroom?
Assembly member, I'm not a doctor. I did play one once on TV, but I wouldn't pretend to say that I have the expertise to say what's the right metric. But I can tell you this. The Center for Disease Control has created some metrics that for when certain things can reopen. I think that there is a way for us to really extrapolate from that to create a metric for our schools. And what I've asked the California Department of Public Health to do is to help us create a metric for schools, to have clarity around when you're entering into the danger zone, and you might need to say, okay, let's start slowly. Let's open and distance learning. Let's monitor and be prepared to pivot into in-class instruction, or when the conditions are okay. And so I know that the Department of Public Health is thinking about how to do this. They're having conversations about that. But as you point out, Assembly Member, I think that we've seen that for the last month, the rate of infection has increased dramatically. 8% is pretty close to where Los Angeles County is, and they're about, last I checked, closer to 10%. And I believe that they made the right decision to say we're moving into distance learning. I know that Contra Costa County, and I know, Senator, you have Contra Costa and Alameda County, but I know that Contra Costa County is on the list of counties to watch. Many of the counties in the Bay Area are in that situation. I just think that now is the time for us to say, let's move cautiously. If it helps, Assembly Member, I'd say this. The California Department of Education operates and supports 3 schools in our state. They serve wonderful students, deaf and blind students. One of them is in Fremont. One of them is in Riverside. Actually, 2 are in Fremont. And you know, we've given parents at the school, we've said that we're going to open and distance learning to be safe. We're anticipating that at least for the first month that we'll open and distance learning. Our schools have a residential program where our students can stay at school. That means students come from almost 40 or 45 different counties. That in and of itself creates certain health risks. And so, you know, while we're not health experts, we just believe that we have to pay attention to a lot of these warning signs. And so we've made the decision to open and distance learning. But we're going to monitor the conditions. If things get better, we hope to be able to move back into in-person instruction. And the last thing I'll say on this, Assembly Member, is that some have said that what we should look at as an indicator, and I believe some of this came from the CDC's guidance. Some of this actually has been articulated in a letter from the California Federation of Teachers. Some have said that one type of metric that could work is seeing a decline in cases over a 14-day period. You know, we're engaging more health experts to help us get answers so that they get directed back to schools. We'd certainly be open in that or any other metric that makes sense. We didn't put one in our guidance because we didn't have the cases that we're seeing right now. We don't have the health expertise, but we're looking to make sure that there's an answer that schools are going to have and to make sure that they get that real soon, Assembly Member.
Superintendent Thurman, I know you don't have much time left, but we do a lightning round of a couple questions if we could. A school board member from Pleasanton writes in to ask about child nutrition programs. Are they going to be able to continue with remote learning as the school year begins? Any thoughts on child nutrition efforts?
You know, I would say that we could start by looking to what our experience was when we went into distance learning in March. And I am amazed at what our schools and our staff continue to do around all nutrition programs. You know, at the time, we had meals being distributed at more than 5,000 locations throughout the state. The Department of Education got all kinds of waivers from the state to make that as flexible as possible, because we know that for many of our young people, this is the only meal they may get. We have students who count on school for 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 meals a day. And so we've been working to get all kinds of waivers from the federal government. We've been trying to get even, you know, there's some money that the federal government's holding on that California should have. You know, it's sort of like being punished. They're like punishing us and saying, well, we normally reimburse you on the amount of meals you distribute, and that's how schools build their budget. And so because, of course, there'd be fewer meals because of the pandemic and the difficulty to provide the meals, that means that our school districts have actually gotten less money in their reimbursements, money that they need to be able to continue serving young people during the pandemic. And so I just want you to know that we're at the bat for our schools in Washington, D.C. to see how we can free up some of those unreimbursed dollars. I want to thank the Pleasanton School Board member and just let you know that our office will continue to provide guidance on how to distribute meals at all levels. And if you need any support, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to provide it.
And let me ask you this as we sum up our conversation. Are there things that we in the legislature and the Senate and the Assembly can do to be more supportive of our schools? Are there roadblocks that you're finding in different programs you'd like to fund or support? Is there things that we could better partner with you on?
Senator, thanks for asking that question. I think town halls like this are really important. They help us to together, get the word out to families and answer questions. And I just have to applaud all of the superintendents and districts that you have on this call, because a lot of times when I get on these town halls, most of it, everything's local. And they always say politics are all local, but nothing is more important and localized than your local educational needs. And I just have to say that your local superintendents are doing a great job. Your local educators, both teachers and classified staff, they're doing a great job. They tend to have the information that your constituents want better than what we can answer, because everything is so kind of localized. But we'll always join these town halls because it helps us to hear what people are looking for. If you hear things from your school district, Senator, and from your constituents the way you bubbled them up to me, the text messages, even the text messages are helpful because we need to have that information so that we can go and advocate, with the Department of Finance and the governor's office. Senator, I think when we lock up together, like you and the two assembly members, on this call, we can go to the governor together. We can go to the Department of Finance and just, it's not that they don't want to help, but I think they need to have the specific context. People need to know that counseling programs are really hard to find right now. When we went into the pandemic, most of our counseling programs that do school-based mental health and school-based health, and they rely on programs like Medi-Cal, they weren't able to serve students because they didn't have that direct contact. That meant they weren't able to build. A lot of these are community-based organizations that were at risk of closing their doors. The same thing was happening in after-school programs, and because of the work of this legislature, we were able to keep funding in place so those after-school programs could keep their doors open, and some of those mental health organizations could keep their doors open. But right now, I think it was the superintendent that last spoke. I don't know if it was Lafayette. I might have missed the district, but
it was Pittsburgh.
Right now, I'm sorry, for Pittsburgh, right now for districts, as we prepare to go back into distance learning potentially, the need for counseling is going to be greater than ever. Our students experience the high rate of suicide and depression during being in distance learning, and without resources, to address counseling directly, to do outreach when kids don't check in. I think that's what the superintendent was talking about. I've created a kind of ad hoc counseling coalition where I'm asking all the counseling and psychology groups to come together to help us fill the gaps, because we can't let what happened before happen again. We can't have hundreds of thousands of kids in our state who didn't check in and they didn't get any support. We have to find a way to find those students, give them support, and the ones that did check in, give them support as well. And so if we can just continue to band together as you're doing now, Senator, I think we can do so much more for our kids. It's true, there's a lot that we don't know, but together we figure out these answers. When we stick together, we can do more together. And I believe that we're going to make the most of the situation that we're in by standing together, being stronger together on behalf of our 6 million students.
Well, amen to that, and we want to be partners. There's nothing more important that we as a state do than educating our kids, and we so appreciate your leadership. We're going to turn now to some of our local leaders and the work that they're doing, but I want to say again, thank you for being a part of this conversation today and continuing to exert such great leadership for our schools, Superintendent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I look forward to our continued work together, and to everyone on your call, Senator, and to the Assembly members, I just want to say continue to be well. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Terrific. Well, let's turn now. We have some local superintendents on the call. Superintendent Bowers from Livermore, Superintendent Whitmore from Lafayette. We have a school board leader, and our teachers union head, Ann Katzberg, on the line to continue this conversation. But let's go to Superintendent Bowers of Livermore. Thank you very much for joining. If you're still there, can you say hello?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, good morning.
Appreciate your patience. I know that you got your Bachelor's of Arts from Berkeley, a Master's in Science and Education Leadership from East Bay, Cal State East Bay, and your doctorate in Education Leadership from Berkeley. You've been a teacher 13 years before getting into the administrative ranks, and thank you for your local leadership for our schools. Could you start off by giving us a sense of what's happening in Livermore? How have you made these tough choices that we've been talking about so far this morning?
So Livermore's in a little different situation than many of our other districts because we have not yet made our choice. We're 40 days out before the start of school, and so we are still actively preparing for hybrid option and or distance learning. One of the things that's really important for us is that we focus on what we can do and not just immediately figure that we must respond to what we can't do. And so we are still planning for hybrid and, of course, respecting distance learning for if that works most for families. And at one time, it looked more promising to be hybrid, and as other districts who start earlier have figured out, it may end up being distance learning might be the only viable option. But our focus is really going to be on educating everyone about you have 40 days. If school is this important, which we believe it is, and in-person instruction in some format is really what our especially youngest kids need most, then I'm going to challenge our community to get those numbers down, to wear your masks, socially distance, do all of those things because we got it down once, and then it spiked. And it spiked So if I were to ask anyone to do, it's to really get that message out to everyone. If it is as important that we say it, we have to not just say it, we have to show it. And in order to get our kids back, we have to get the spiking and the spread under control. We know what mitigating factors worked, and then people just didn't persevere in them. And now we're in the situation where we are being forced or back-ended into a distance learning model, which is going to be much better if that's what we go into. It'll be much more robust. We definitely have experienced and learned so much more, and we have better tools. But we still know our most vulnerable kids. And in Livermore, we have 26% of students identified in poverty, and more that are going to be there because of this situation. And it is not ideal for them to be distance learning, especially our youngest students. So we're going to push forward and really trying to say we have 40 days to get those numbers down, and hopefully we will have some form of interaction that is not just having a little kindergartner meeting a teacher and greeting their teacher on a computer screen.
Well said. Assemblywoman, you have a question?
Yeah, well, thank you for that reminder, Superintendent Bowers. I think it is so important that we remind our community that they are our partners in getting our students back to school by driving those numbers down. I have a question. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the health and safety of our communities, which is our top priority, and then educating our students is, second to that. But on that list, and for a lot of the people on the call, we have families with two working parents. That's how they make it work in the Bay Area. And the schools are their lifeline to continuing to go to work. And especially as a woman, I want to speak from a gender equity perspective, keeping women in the workforce. We know they're the ones that will leave. How are our schools thinking about supporting those families that have in the past relied on school as a way to continue to work and provide for their family?
Is that a question for me? And I wasn't sure.
No, for you, Dr. Bowers.
So in Livermore, I can only speak from what Livermore is doing, of course. So we actually are working with our Livermore Area Parks and Recreation Department, and also our schools. Some of our schools lease to daycare and child care providers. So in those situations, we do have 4 sites open for at least the first responders and families such as that. But in our case in Livermore, that is one of our challenges, and we're going to have to rely on community partners because our Livermore School District, we can house students, but we don't have the other structures in place. So it's really going to be a community effort.
Okay, thank you.
And Superintendent Bowers from Livermore, you talked about, and I agree, that how public health for our whole community, our whole area, kind of drives the challenges that you're facing now. Is there any particular number? They talk about the positivity rate of spread in our communities as a way to guide choices. Is there a number that you're looking at that causes you to say, if we can get below 5% or 3%, is there any number that public health officers have advised you to look at in terms of having students present on the campus?
So we're fortunate to be on a weekly phone call with the Alameda County Health Department, and we have really pressed for those numbers, and our school nurses as well. They don't have a magical number. They do know that some districts have come up with their own factor, and in some cases, the factor that they've created or the trigger that they've created for reopening is something that according to the health department, would basically put them in distance learning for 2 years. So it's unrealistic. And so the health department has promised us that they are going to come up with, just as they have with other phases of opening with, whether it's a hair salon or something, that they are going to come up with some better standard and metrics for us to use as a guide, because it can't be just anecdotal, and it can't just be a feel that you have or the squeakiest wheels and all that. It really has to be something that's more scientific based. But they said generally it's if numbers are stable and beginning to decline.
Very good.
Which exactly is not what we have right now. That's not what we have right now.
We're talking to Superintendent Dr. Kelly Bowers from Livermore. Let me invite Superintendent Whitmore from the Lafayette Unified School District to join the conversation. Superintendent Whitmore, are you there?
Yes.
Well, terrific. You have a very deep background in education leadership. You've served as a deputy superintendent for the Department of Education under Superintendent Elaine Easton many years ago. You've been a superintendent of the Los Gatos School District. I know you spent time at the Davis Unified School District, and you also were a board member of the Acalanes Union School District. You stepped out of the administrative role and and became one of our policy leaders, and now you're at Lafayette. So this is a long path of great leadership, and I'm sure the circumstances that you're finding yourself is something you never ever thought a lot about. So how are you coping with this, and what's the status of your students in Lafayette?
Thanks for the kind words, Senator. I think, it's been interesting to try to look at this from multiple policy perspectives, given my background. In Lafayette, we voted last night to begin the school year in all distance learning. I appreciate Assemblymember Bauer-Kahn's shout out to the school boards at the beginning of the call. We've put them through a rough experience over the past few weeks, and they've devoted a lot of evening hours to the school districts. It was a difficult decision. It was not unanimous for us. I think everybody is coming to the table with different perspectives about what the best thing is to do, although everybody has the health and safety mandates paramount as value that we have to bring to this decision making. I think for us, one of the things that people really wrestle with in our community, and that you've heard is a pretty constant theme throughout this call, is if the data now are leading us to close to in-person instruction, what data will lead us to open? And like Kelly in Alameda County, I think our county, Janet and I also have the privilege of sitting with our county health officers once a week in a meeting. I don't believe they believe it's possible to come to good decisions just on a countywide basis. I think they believe there's an obligation of the state to step in and define for us statewide what those numbers should look like, if it's percent positivity or whatever it may be, that guides us going forward. And that's partly because we don't have federal policy making, as you heard Superintendent Thurman describe, that's guiding us across the nation. So I think that's one of the things we wrestle with the most. The child care question that just came up is very important in our community also. And I think the other thing I would add is our parents are really struggling with their role in overseeing an educational experience for their children and our students. And I think maybe that's something that the state can help provide some input and guidance and templates for, so that it doesn't all fall on a local district. Like Janet, we had been planning for hybrid primarily throughout the summer. We have a little bit smaller operation than Pittsburgh or Livermore, so we had really focused on the hybrid option. We're now pivoting to distance learning, and so we're in a real sprint to the start of the school year to make sure we have something that's going to work for every student to the best of our ability.
Yeah, the time, you don't have a lot of time, and I'm sure that puts a lot of pressure on your whole team, for all of our school leaders. Your school year begins when?
Our first day of school is scheduled for August 11th.
August 11th. And Superintendent Bowers, when does your school start in Livermore?
We start August 25th.
And Superintendent Schultz from Pittsburgh, what is your date?
August 12th.
August 12th, yeah, not a lot of time. So that's a great strain and stress I'm sure you're all going through. And we did hear from the superintendent that we're expecting an announcement as soon as tomorrow from the state, from the governor, and hopefully can provide some clarity on some of these issues that you're wrestling with. Let me invite in, and I appreciate her patience, Ann Katzberg, who is the president of the San Ramon Valley Education Association. You've been in that leadership role for a long time. You are a teacher in San Ramon Valley. Ann Katzberg, thank you for your patience, and please join this conversation. From the teacher's point of view, give us your 10,000-foot view of what's happening.
Well, I want to first off start by saying thank you. I'm very grateful for your leadership, the leadership of our assembly, and also our superintendent. I think that making our schools and education a priority is definitely something that I've noticed with this assembly and Senate as well. So we know that our students are a priority, and you've spoken to that as well, and that we have to make sure that we do this right, and we have to have the metrics that will allow us to enter into a safe environment when we teach. We want our students back in schools. We definitely do. We know, though, that being indoors for an extended period of time right now is going to heighten the risk. So we are being challenged with how are we going to enter into school, and some of us just in a few short weeks. And I know that there's been a lot of decisions about distance learning. One thing that I haven't heard today that hasn't been mentioned is that this is an opportunity for us. It's an opportunity for us because we're educators and we know how to be creative. We know how to make an optimal situation no matter where we're placed, as far as if it's teaching from a classroom that happens to be remote or if it's teaching with, one-on-one with our students. Some of the programs that we've looked at have been the hybrid and the distance learning and then going back full-time. So when we have metrics in place that allow us to be safe, I think that we should be able to figure this out with some level of fluidity, and it's complex. It's going to take a lot of nuances. I want to just share a couple of stories that I've heard from some of our members. We had an opportunity to do remote learning through summer school, and we had some amazing successful programs. I know that synchronous learning is optimal, and we have to make sure that we can schedule it so our educators can meet with their students in a remote classroom should we go to that distance learning. We have to remember that there could be, for our students, remote fatigue. So having a student online all day needs to be examined very closely, and we need to provide an education that allows for our students to work, if we do go to distance learning, independently as well as being online. So I hope that we can enter into discussions with everybody about how to make this next phase as we, navigate this pathway of COVID, not knowing where it's going to take us, with a level of expertise that guarantees our students get the best education.
Well said, Ann. Assemblywoman Bauer-Cahan, you had a question, please.
Yes. So you just touched on exactly what I was going to ask about, Ann, and I would love it if Superintendent Whitmore, if you have thoughts, you jump in as well. So as I mentioned at the top of the call, my children, and I know many of my friends' children, definitely were more engaged during the synchronous learning, during their Zoom calls, when they got to engage with the classroom and with their teacher. And I think parents are wanting more of that because we felt like it was really where our kids were both happiest and learning the most. And I know there's a range of things people are talking about. Dublin Unified has approved the use of cameras for teachers to continue to teach in the classroom, whether the students are present or not, which personally I think is really exciting because I think it's the most fluid option, given I think we will be changing our models throughout the year depending on what is happening with the virus. But then there's, daily Zooms or what are the teachers thinking and what are they open to when it comes to adding more synchronous learning, and what do you think that might look like?
So if I can jump in right here,
please,
I wanted just to share that I think what I've learned from our teachers is that I have a teacher who is teaching special education students. And what she did is that she made it really unique to the needs of the students. And I think that's one angle that we really need to focus in on, is that there are going to be students that need more support. And how can we provide that? And in her schedule, she was able to meet the needs of the student throughout the day whenever the student was most available. And sometimes students need phone calls. And we need to focus on the social emotional learning that was spoken to by Superintendent Thurman, that our focus right now is going to have to be on how do we support our students emotionally. And we need to do that right. We don't have second chances with our students when it comes to having them in our classrooms. And so when we figure out how we're going to educate and do it within the parameters that are going to keep everybody safe, then we really need to hone down and look into the nuances of what that is going to entail. And I can think of a lot of ideas because that's what we do. But, younger children don't do as well remotely. And I know you have young children. And so teaching, has to be specific to the student's needs. And that's where our energy needs to go.
And I'll jump in too, since you invited me.
Superintendent Whitmore from Lafayette. Please go ahead.
Thanks. I think the real challenge in this is that the best pedagogy and the best teaching that goes on isn't anymore a large block of direct instruction with the teacher lecturing to a student or to a group of students. It's the teacher providing what you might call a mini lesson and then sending a group of students off to work independently and moving around and checking in with each of them individually or in small groups. That's what great pedagogy looks like today. That's hard to mirror in an online kind of live camera transmission. And we will absolutely commit to more synchronous contact with our students as we move to this next phase, and we know we can improve on the efforts we made in the spring since we were so rushed into it. But I think the real thing that we all have to wrestle with is how do you translate that really good teaching that we all want to support into that online environment? And we haven't completely cracked the nut yet, and we're open to ideas and input from people about how to do that best. And we're working very closely with our teachers and have some teacher committees brainstorming this and looking for good professional development opportunities and trying to figure it out.
Awesome. Thank you.
There have been so many folks who have written in with questions and remarks that they wanted to share. I want to at least give some time to that. So let me mention a few of the things people have said, and then my guests may have some thoughts or reactions to what people have said. Valerie writes in and she says, I don't think the schools should reopen. The teachers can teach virtually the same schedule as the students attending in person. That keeps students and teachers safe until we learn more about the virus. JD writes in and says, yes, they are safe. They need to get back to normal. Otherwise, children are not getting a fair shake. Federal and state funding should be terminated to those districts who do not fully open. As a kid, we started after Labor Day and got out around May or early June. That will be fine. Lee writes in and she says, as a mother of a type 1 diabetic, I implore you to resort to solely online education until the virus is cleared. It's a global pandemic, and I would argue that the world will understand if graduations are delayed while we ensure kids understand the material and are qualified. Hands down, we'd all like to be at school, especially those with children that have special needs, but at what cost? Safety and science before all else. But then a nurse writes in, and she has a little bit of a different view. She says, I'm directly impacted by the pandemic. I see and hear its devastating effects daily. Having said that, knowing that the pandemic can last a year or two, there has to be a happy medium in how it's handled. Total shutdown of schools and businesses is not a happy medium. She says her hope is that schools can open with a hybrid model and mandatory masks. Jeff writes in with another view. He says the solution is to move everything outside, as universities are doing. Move classrooms outside, and as in many communities there's public spaces where this could occur. Small cohorts of students wearing masks learn in outdoor settings. Why aren't we pursuing this? And finally, I'll mention Erica's note in. She says, I live in Danville, and many people are not wearing masks. I do not feel comfortable sending my children to school where we can't control this virus or other people's actions. I would feel better having my child learn remotely. To worry if your child will come back sick is not something a family should be forced into. My friends, anyone want to react to those thoughts?
Well, I can jump in. This is Ann.
Ann Casper from San Ramon Valley, please.
Yes, one of the things I do is I agree with a lot of these statements because we want to make sure that we are back in school and we are doing it safely. Is being back in school, learning remotely, it is until we are sure that we have made all of the improvements. Superintendent Thurman alluded to some recommendations of a downward trend of the COVID virus for 14 days. Is that a metric we want to use? Possibly. If we go, down, we could go back into our classrooms. We have to make sure that we're safe. Being outside is safer. I know that other countries have, they started in Denmark in having, very few students inside and a lot of students learning outside. we have the understanding of how to deter the virus. However, we need to have the commitment from everybody, like Superintendent Bauer spoke to, that we're going to wear masks, that we're going to keep clean, that we're going to keep our kids safe, that we're going to take temperature checks before we get into school. All of these guarantees that, will help us arrive to a place where we can begin to educate. I do not want to look at a future where we're not back with our students. That's why we're in this business as educators, and I hear daily how terribly sad our teachers are that they can't be with their students. And building relationships remotely is going to be a new novelty for us. We don't know how to do that from the onset. In the spring, we already knew our kids. So this is going to be a unique opportunity for us to figure out, if we do go online and teach distance learning, how to have those relationships. And it has to be done, like we've talked about, with synchronous learning and having small group instruction and varying our delivery so that we can meet the needs of our children.
Thank you,
I would just, I'm sorry, this is Kelly from Livermore. To say a smaller scale, what we did, say, for our high school graduations, we had all the same pressures everybody had, and many people went to virtual, and I respect that, I don't judge that, but in our community, we really felt our students need to have some kind of a hybrid graduation as well. We felt that they needed to have a sense of closure, some sense of ceremony, as well as some special time for them. So we worked with the health department. We came up with stringent criteria, and we also respected the fact that some families were too nervous, so they didn't send their children for that, and they still received their diploma. But we had close to 1,100 students go through an in-person, one-by-one graduation. It was a 4-day experience in 104-degree heat, but everybody had their moment. And to me, that's what it takes. And to piggyback onto the previous speaker, we are creative. We can do these things. Tell us what we can do. What are the rules? We can follow them. We can make it as safe as possible under these circumstances. Everybody wants that for our students. And so I just think that if we get clear guidance, and that's what we need clear guidance, because then we can make it clear guidance and funding, of course, in order to make it happen. And then we will make it happen, because kids want to be with their teachers, and teachers want to be with their kids, and parents can't share and show the dispersion alone.
That's Supervisor Bowers from Livermore. We're having some cell phone reception there, so not hearing every single word that she is saying, but we appreciate your input there. We've got a couple of folks have written in. Yvette has written in, and David from Oakley, about the issue of air filtration systems in schools, noting that some rooms don't have windows that open, and the concerns about if someone does come in the classroom infected, that others might be exposed in that fashion. Superintendent Schultz from Pittsburgh or Whitmore from Lafayette, do either of you have any thoughts about this issue of the ventilation in your schools? Have you worked on that prior to the kids coming back, if they do come back in the classroom? Superintendent Whitmore, anything from Lafayette on that?
I was waiting for Janet to answer that, but I'll take a stab at it.
All right.
We have begun a discussion with our county public health agency about the issue. I mean, it's really an issue of aerosol transmission, and the science isn't definitive on that yet. But I know we're all working to make sure that we can have good preventative practices in place if the science for that does pan out. So we heard from our county public health officers about the efficacy of high-grade filters if your HVAC system can handle the newer, more modern filters in your HVAC units that take out a lot more particles. So I know everybody's taking a look at that. There may be some other alternatives that you can bring into a classroom that provide that same level of protection for students in the classroom. So again, this is something where we're really waiting for the science to evolve. We're all looking at it carefully. We know it's an issue for parents, for our staff, for everybody that would come into our classrooms or our offices in the district.
Very good. And Superintendent Schultz from Pittsburgh, anything to add to that?
Yeah, total agreement. I mean, we are fortunate to be meeting, on a regular basis with our colleagues across the county and with Contra Costa County Health Department as well too. And we did have a discussion at this last meeting around the filters, and so that's something that we definitely are looking at and making sure. And then, as that guidance gets a little bit more concrete, then that'll give us some direction in really analyzing where we are in comparison. So right now we're sort of gathering all of our information from our schools in terms of what we currently have in place that we know meet all the current standards, and then some that are above that depending on the age of the building and the filtration system. We've been fortunate in Pittsburgh to have some upgrades through some grants due to our asthma rates and things like that in our community, that we were able to secure some grants to do some upgrades. So we'll look at those comparisons and gather that data so that we're ready to go when we have some clear guidance.
Very, very good. So Joan writes in fact, a number of people have written in and raised questions about whether the population as a whole is at risk with students going back to school. A few people have noted that the people who get seriously ill from COVID are not young people under the age of 20, that it's older people that have been at risk. And they're raising questions as to why can't schools come back in, and believing that there really is very little community risk. Well, let me try to answer their concerns with some information that I've received. Because we look around the world, I know our education leaders are looking for guidance anywhere we can find it for where the schools have been able to go back safely. And there is an interesting lesson from the country of Israel. In the middle of May, they had reduced their COVID-19 exposure to only 10 new cases on the date of May 17th. And that was the date they decided to reopen all the schools in Israel. It has a population of 9 million people, so obviously smaller than California, but still significant. And so they went from having 10 cases in a day after the schools opened to a situation where their infections now are out of control. And one of the things they did in Israel is they asked people whether they had kids in school to try to find out where was the source of spread. And they determined that 47% of the infections in that country, that outbreak that is occurring right now, have occurred from families who had kids in school. And so they believe there was a key link to the exposure to kids bringing it back into their family unit, their parents, their grandparents, and that was a key part of the exposure in that country. And that's a lesson, I think, that many of us are looking at very closely. Kristen Connolly writes in, she's on the Acalanes Union School Board, and she writes in a note and raises a question about testing and track and tracing for the virus. And she says it's incredibly frustrating that the lack of testing in the state and contact tracing has created this problem for the schools, that if we can't clamp down on the virus with testing and track and tracing, that this has created the problem that we're all talking about today. And I think, Kristen, you're right. The Governor's Secretary of Health this week has acknowledged that we aren't able to do enough testing around the state to give us, we don't have the supplies to help suppress the virus, and there's a lot of questions that have been raised this week that on the track and tracing system, that do we able to get to people who have been infected to find out who they've been in contact with to try to suppress it that way. That's the classic strategy for dealing with a virus like this, is high amounts of testing and then very active tracking and tracing of those who have been infected to make sure they're quarantined. And so that remains a serious issue for our state. You're correct to identify it. And, of course, the consequences for the schools are that we're all in this together. And if that virus is spreading in our communities, then it creates a significant problem for our schools. So with that, Assemblywoman, as we close up, any closing comments that you would like to make?
Well, I just want to thank you and all the parents on the call and all the educators who work so hard to educate our students. We started by talking about our own family experiences, and this is hard, but I think that we will get through this, and like many of your children, my children's educational experience won't be the ideal, but it will be meaningful. I think that our educators are going to work hard to ensure that, and that we will get through this. And, as a working mom myself with a husband who also works, I understand the struggles of the working parents out there, and we're going to work to make sure you're supported as well. And the partnership that both, the senator and we have as assembly members, that we have with our local educators, that work is what is going to get us there. So thank you for being our partners, and I look forward to the school year, wherever it will be.
Well, thank you, Assemblywoman. I know Assemblymember Grayson had to drop from the call, but I certainly appreciate the great partnership that we have and the important work that we're doing. Superintendent Schultz from Pittsburgh, thank you for your leadership. Any final thoughts from you?
Just want to thank everyone and really appreciate everyone's patience and flexibility as we work through this together. And it's comforting to know that everyone's best interest is what is the best interest for our children. So thank you for everyone for all of that and for everyone's partnership.
Well, great. Thank you. And I know Superintendent Whitmore and Bowers had to drop off the call. Ann Katzberg from the Teachers Union in San Ramon Valley, thank you again for your participation. Any final thoughts from you?
Yes, I want to just thank you as well, and I really appreciate the partnership that we all are cultivating during this time, that we need to come together more than ever. As Tony Thurmond said, we are stronger together, and that hopefully is what we're going to aspire to throughout this entire endeavor. So thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I really appreciate it.
Great, thank you, and I certainly want to extend all of our thanks to Superintendent Tony Thurmond for his leadership, for participating in the conversation today, and I know in the weeks ahead. So thank you all for participating, listening to this conversation. I think we feel your angst, your stress, your worry in terms of what is happening right now. I mean, we're living in this pandemic in real time, and I know that we are all working very hard to try to make good choices about health and about safety for all of you as well as our kids. As I mentioned at the beginning of this town hall, this is our 20th on the issue of the coronavirus and its impacts. If you want to listen to a recording of this town hall or the others, they're all available on my Senate website at sd07.senate.ca.gov. If you have suggestions on other town halls that you would like to see us conduct to bring in experts from our community to share their wisdom with us, please send me a note on the email that was a part of the announcement for this event. On my website, we also have links to information from the Center for Disease Control, the County Public Health Department, certainly the Office of Education, who we heard from today. I am truly sensitive to how this crisis is affecting all of us in every parts of our life, both personally and economically, professionally, as parents, as grandparents. This is a public health crisis of enormous magnitude. And these town halls are a way to try to bring accurate and reliable information to you so that we can learn from it and hopefully help us cope as we endure these difficult weeks that I'm sure are going to be ahead of us. So I want to thank you all for listening, and again for my guests for sharing their expertise on our problems and issues facing our schools. And I look forward to engaging with you more in the coming weeks. Thank you all so much, and have a very nice rest of your day.